The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled like leather and old money. My father sat at the head of the table, laughing. Not at a joke. At me. "She thinks she can represent herself," he said, loud enough for the entire board to hear. His lawyer, a man named Holt, silver-haired and expensive, smiled politely into his coffee cup. My own daughter, standing there with a manila folder like she printed something off the internet. Everyone laughed. Even the court reporter looked away. I stood at the other end of that table alone, in the blazer I'd bought second-hand from a consignment shop on Fletcher Street. The seams were slightly off at the shoulders. I'd steamed it 3 times that morning. I thought no one would notice. My father noticed. "Sweetheart," he said. And the word landed like a slap. "Go home. This is business. This has always been business. You never understood that." I picked up my folder, I straightened my blazer, and I sat down. Let me go back. I grew up in a house that had a name, not a street address, an actual name engraved on a brass plaque by the front gate, Caldwell House. 3 stories of white Georgian colonial on 11 acres outside of Ashford, Virginia. There were horses, there was a groundskeeper. There was a housekeeper named Mrs. Point Pruitt who made biscuits on Sunday mornings and pretended not to hear when my parents argued. My father, Randall Caldwell, built Caldwell and Merritt Construction from a 2-truck operation into one of the most profitable mid-Atlantic development firms in the country. He was the kind of man who shook hands too long and remembered every name and never once, in my entire childhood, asked me what I was reading. My mother left when I was 11. Not dramatically. There was no screaming, no thrown dishes. She just packed 2 suitcases one Tuesday afternoon while I was at school and called me that evening from a hotel in Richmond to say she needed to find herself. I never blamed her. I understood, even at 11. What I didn't understand was that she wouldn't take me with her. After she left, my father remarried quickly. Her name was Renata. Not in the list I checked. No, wait. I'll call her what I always called her in my head. My stepmother. She was 41, divorced, and had a son named, I'm going to call him what he was, my stepbrother, 19 when they married. Already working at my father's firm. Already being groomed. I was 14. My father sat us both down the week before the wedding and explained the situation with the clinical efficiency he normally reserved for contracts. Caldwell and Merritt would eventually pass to both of us, he said. Equal shares. Family was family. He looked at my stepbrother when he said it. I spent the next 4 years watching my stepbrother learn the business. Weekend site visits, summer internships, dinner table conversations about load-bearing calculations and municipal permits, and which county commissioners were worth the phone call. I sat across from them and ate my food and asked questions and was told, gently but consistently, that I'd find my own path. When I was 18, I got into the architecture program at Virginia Commonwealth. Full scholarship. I called my father from the parking lot of my high school, hands shaking, voice cracking a little. "That's good, honey," he said. "Your brother just closed his first independent contract today. I took him to dinner. Can I call you back?" He did not call me back. I worked my way through school, not symbolically, actually. I waitressed Thursday through Sunday. I tutored underclassmen in structural drafting. My junior year, I won a regional design competition and used the prize money to pay for my final semester of materials. I graduated with honors and a $6,000 balance in my checking account that I had earned, every dollar, myself. My father sent flowers. The card said, "Proud of you, Dad." He did not come to the ceremony. I moved to Baltimore after graduation. Rented a studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had one functioning elevator and a radiator that clanged all winter like someone trapped inside it. I got a junior position at a small architecture firm, Counter & Associates, doing residential renovations and the occasional commercial project. I was good at it. Not performing for approval good. Actually good. My supervisor, a woman named, I'll call her my boss, told me after 6 months that I had the best instinct for spatial problem-solving she'd seen in a junior hire in 15 years. I stayed late. I learned the permit systems for 4 different counties. I started handling client presentations on my own. I did not tell my father any of this. He didn't ask. What he did do, twice a year, was invite me home for holidays. And what those visits looked like was my stepbrother presenting his latest project at the dinner table while my stepmother refilled wine glasses, and my father nodded and said good thinking and smart move, and occasionally, almost as an afterthought, turned to me and asked how the little firm was going. The little firm, the second year I was there, billed $4.2 million. I was managing 3 projects simultaneously, but I smiled and said it was going well and passed the rolls. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with paperwork. My father called me one October morning, a Tuesday, I remember because I was on my way to a site meeting and had to pull over, and told me that he was restructuring the ownership of Caldwell and Merritt. He was transferring operational control to my stepbrother. My shares, the ones he'd promised me at 14, were being reclassified as non-voting preferred stock. "You'll still get dividends," he said. "When there are dividends, you've never been involved in the business, sweetheart. This is practical. You never let me be involved," I said. "That's not fair. Dad, I have a structural engineering minor and 5 years of commercial project management. You've never once asked me to. This isn't the time for this conversation." "Then when is?" He hung up. I sat in my car on the shoulder of Route 40 for a long time after that. A truck went past and the whole car shook. I watched it go. Then I called my lawyer, a woman I'd hired 2 years earlier to review my employment contract, practical and careful even then, and told her what had happened. She said, "Did you ever sign anything formally surrendering those shares?" I said, "No." She said, "Then we have a conversation to have." What followed was 14 months of the most exhausting thing I have ever done. Discovery requests and depositions, and my father's very expensive legal team producing document after document arguing that the original share promise had been verbal, informal, legally non-binding. My stepmother testified that she'd never heard my father make any such commitment. My stepbrother, when deposed, said he didn't recall the specifics of any conversation that had taken place when he was 19. My father's lawyer, Holt, told the mediator that I was an emotionally unstable young woman with a grudge. I was 31 years old, managing a $6 million commercial project in downtown Baltimore, sleeping 4 hours a night, and paying my legal fees out of savings I had spent a decade building. None of that was in the room when Holt said it. I started doing something during those 14 months that no one knew about. Not my lawyer, not my boss, not the one friend I had who knew any of this was happening. I started studying. Not architecture, finance. I'd always understood numbers. It was part of the job. Cost estimation, project budgeting, understanding where money moved and why. But I went deeper. I started with books and moved to online courses, and eventually to conversations with a retired investment banker I'd met at a conference who agreed, for reasons I still find somewhat mysterious, to teach me how to read a corporate balance sheet the way a doctor reads an X-ray. His name doesn't matter. What matters is what he showed me. Caldwell and Merritt, for all its reputation, was not in good financial health. My father had over-leveraged 3 major projects in the past 18 months, a mixed-use development in Northern Virginia, a hotel conversion in Fredericksburg, a luxury townhome community outside Annapolis that had run 12% over budget before ground had even fully broken. The firm was carrying nearly $38 million in debt, most of it refinanced at rates that would have made a sensible person lose sleep. My father was not losing sleep. He was renovating the kitchen at Caldwell House with imported Italian marble. I looked at those numbers for a long time. Then I made a phone call. The person I called was a woman I'd worked with briefly on a commercial project 2 years earlier. She had left architecture to run a small private investment vehicle. Nothing flashy. Nothing that showed up in any searches if you weren't looking carefully. I had stayed in touch with her the way I stay in touch with most people I respect. Quietly, consistently, without needing anything. I told her what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You understand what you'd be doing?" "Yes," I said. "And you're prepared for what comes after?" "Yes," I said. "I've been preparing for a long time." What we built over the next 8 months, working evenings and weekends from my kitchen table in Baltimore, was a small acquisition vehicle. I put in everything I had, the savings, the equity from a small condo I'd bought and sold 2 years prior, a loan I took against my firm's performance bonus that I told exactly no one about. My partner brought in 2 other quiet investors, both of whom had their own reasons for being invisible. The vehicle had a name that meant nothing to anyone: Arbor Bridge Capital. Caldwell and Merritt's lead bank was preparing to call its largest note. The Northern Virginia project had stalled completely, permits denied, and the carrying costs were bleeding the firm. My father's team was quietly shopping the debt, looking for someone willing to take it off the bank's hands at a discount. Arbor Bridge Capital made an offer. A clean offer. Straightforward terms, no faces attached to it, just documentation, wire transfers, and a signature. The day the note transferred, I was at my desk in Baltimore eating a sandwich. My phone showed a notification from our transaction account. I looked at it for a moment, then I finished my sandwich. The meeting my father called 3 weeks later was framed as a restructuring discussion. His legal team, his CFO, my stepbrother in a very new suit, they had apparently received a notice of accelerated repayment terms from their new creditor. Unusual terms, not hostile, but requiring renegotiation of the entire debt structure. They wanted to know who Arbor Bridge Capital was. I sat across from my father for the first time in 8 months. He looked older, not badly. He'd always been a handsome man, silver-templed and straight-backed. But there was something around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A tightness. He didn't know why I was there. My lawyer had requested my presence as a shareholder. Holt made a joke about it. My father laughed. I opened my folder. What was in the folder was not printed off the internet. What was in the folder was a complete ownership summary of Arbor Bridge Capital, along with the executed transfer documents, the original share promise my father had made when I was 14, which I had found after considerable effort. In the form of a handwritten note on Caldwell and Merritt, letterhead in a box of papers my mother had kept, and eventually mailed me when she moved apartments in Richmond, and a letter signed by me as sole managing partner of Arbor Bridge Capital, outlining the terms under which I was prepared to restructure the debt. I slid the first page across the table to Holt. He looked at it. His expression did the thing I had imagined it would do late at night, sitting at my kitchen table in Baltimore. Not shock, exactly. More like a man who has just stepped onto a floor he expected to be solid and found it wasn't. "Is this?" he started. "Yes," I said. My father looked at Holt, then at the paper, then at me. "You're Arbor Bridge." "I am." He sat back in his chair. My stepbrother, to his credit, said nothing. My stepmother, who had come for reasons no one had explained, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "You don't have the capital for this," my father said. The old reflex, dismissal first, processing second. "The account statements are on page 4, I said. He turned to page 4. He did not say anything for a while after that. I want to be clear about something, because I think this part matters. I did not go into that room to destroy my father. I have spent a lot of nights thinking about this, examining my own motivations the way you'd examine a piece of structural work for hidden stress points. And what I found was not rage. It was something quieter and more durable. The desire to be seen accurately. To exist in a room my father occupied and be seen as what I actually was. Not what he'd decided I was when I was 14. And he turned his chair toward my stepbrother and forgot I was there. The terms I proposed were fair. Better than fair. The restructured repayment schedule gave the firm room to breathe, to stabilize, to deal with the Fredericksburg and Annapolis situations without a fire sale. I was not trying to take Caldwell and Merritt. I didn't want it. What I wanted was the shares my father had promised me. Voting shares. The acknowledgement, written and legally binding, that I was a part of what he'd built, not because I'd worked inside it, but because I was his daughter and he'd said so once in a room and I'd been 14 and believed him. And I wanted one other thing. I wanted him to say in that room, in front of Holt and the CFO and my stepbrother and my stepmother, what he had spent 17 years not saying. He didn't do it immediately. He negotiated. He tried several versions of the conversation where he remained the protagonist. He suggested the handwritten note was ambiguous. He suggested my interpretation of the original promise was self-serving. Holt helpfully pointed out that the note lacked a date. I waited. There is a particular kind of patience that comes from doing everything yourself for a very long time, from wiring your own rent payment and packing your own lunch and pressing your own blazer and driving yourself to every appointment and celebrating your own promotions in your own kitchen with a glass of wine from a bottle that cost $11. You develop a tolerance for silence, for waiting, for letting other people run out of words before you say yours. My father ran out of words somewhere around the 40-minute mark. I should have, he started, stopped. His jaw worked. I should have included you more. When you were younger. It wasn't everything I'd wanted. It was not an apology that contained the full weight of what those years had cost me, but it was real. I could hear that it was real in the way his voice changed on the word younger, like he was seeing something briefly, that he usually kept himself from looking at. Okay, I said. We signed the restructured agreement that afternoon. My shares were restored with full voting rights. The firm got its breathing room. Holt shook my hand on the way out and said something professionally gracious that I have already forgotten. My stepbrother stopped me in the hallway before I reached the elevator. I didn't know, he said, about the original promise. I want you to know that. What he told me was that you weren't interested. I looked at him for a moment. He was sincere, I thought. Probably. I know, I said. And I did. He was not the villain of this story. He had simply been the one who was chosen, and he'd been too young and too eager to question why. For what it's worth, he said. I've watched some of your projects. That mixed-use conversion you did on Pratt Street. The before and after on the structural rework. He paused. It's good work. Thank you, I said. The elevator came. I got in. The doors closed. I drove back to Baltimore in the late afternoon, the light going golden over the highway, the radio playing something I didn't recognize. My hands on the wheel were steady. I had expected to feel something enormous, victory or grief or relief or all three at once. What I actually felt was a quieter thing, like a room that has been closed for a long time, finally getting some air. My condo smelled like the coffee I had left on the counter that morning. I changed out of my blazer, the second-hand one, slightly off at the shoulders, and hung it carefully on the back of the closet door. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, the way I used to sit when I was in my first apartment, and the radiator clanged, and I was tired and 23, and had no idea what any of it would eventually become. I thought about my mother, driving away in a car with 2 suitcases when I was 11. I thought about Mrs. Pruitt and the Sunday biscuits and the brass plaque on the gate that said Caldwell House like a declaration. I thought about 14 years old and a handwritten note on company letterhead and a father who looked at someone else when he spoke. I thought about all the things I had made, alone, in the years between then and now. Then I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and called my boss to tell her I'd be in at 9. Some things you spend years preparing to say. And then the room happens, and you say them, and the world keeps moving exactly as it always did. Only now you know that you were always the one holding the floor up. There's something nobody tells you about building a life entirely on your own. Not the practical part. Not the part about budgeting and second jobs and eating the same pasta for 4 nights because rent is due. That part you figure out fast. What nobody tells you is what it does to your character. The slow, unglamorous way it makes you into someone who doesn't need the room's approval to know what they're worth. I think about my father a lot, not with bitterness. That feeling burned itself out somewhere around the 2nd year of depositions when I was tired enough that I didn't have the energy to maintain it. What I think about now is the mechanism of it. How a man can look at his daughter across a dinner table for 17 years and genuinely not see what's there. Not because he's cruel exactly, but because he decided early what she was, and then he just kept deciding it year after year until it calcified into something he mistook for fact. That's what I've come to understand about the way people underestimate you. It's almost never about you. It's about the story they've already committed to. My father had a story where my stepbrother was the capable one, the one who understood business, the one who deserved the chair at the head of the table. And once that story was written, everything I did got filtered through it. My scholarship, my projects, my years of actual work, none of it registered because it didn't fit the version of me he'd already filed away. The thing is, that left me completely free. I didn't spend those years trying to prove anything to him. I spent them building something real, real skills, real savings, real judgment about where money moves and why. I paid attention to things he didn't think I was paying attention to. I learned from people who had no investment in what I was supposed to be, and when the moment came, I wasn't performing for him. I wasn't finally showing him he was wrong. I was just doing the next logical thing in a sequence I'd been building for years. That's what I want to say to anyone sitting where I sat at 22, in a bad apartment with a clanging radiator, wondering if any of it adds up to something. It adds up. Not on anyone else's timeline. Not in the form anyone else recognizes first. But the work is real, and real things accumulate, whether or not there's an audience. My father said in that boardroom that he should have included me more when I was younger. And I believed him, not because it absolved anything, but because I could hear that he meant it. People don't change all at once. Sometimes they catch a glimpse of the floor they've been standing on, and it takes their breath away for just a second. That second matters. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The reason I was in a position to be seen that day was because I had spent years seeing myself clearly, even when no one else did. Integrity isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's the thing you practice at a kitchen table at 11 at night, when no one will ever know whether you did it right or cut the corner. Randall Caldwell built his empire on reputation. I built mine on the quiet version, the one that exists even when the room is empty. That's the only kind that holds.